particular grade level, I think we were 10th, 11th, 12th, we were the high school kids, we had to work with the elderly with anything they needed, cutting the lawn. I mean, I don't care what it was, whatever that was. And so the particular lady I had, Sister Jenkins, she had a lot of property, a lot of money, and I just watched this really smart lady with all these great things. In my mind, I thought, okay, I want to be her. She has lots of money. She owned lots of real estate. And she always carried cash. She always dealt with cash. She only needed me to be her secretary. So in 10th grade, I was essentially a secretary, just doing whatever she needed. Well, one day we're in the grocery store and she takes out her check and she hands it to me. And so I was thinking that I was just writing out the check for, I thought it was just a regular transaction. For her, it was a necessity because she confided in me that she wasn't able to spell the number. So if it was $39.15, whatever it was. And so when we got to the car, I put her groceries in and all of that. And she just held my hand and she said, "Baby, don't be like me." And I'm thinking, but you're the one I want to be looked at. Like, you have a new car, you have all this stuff. What she meant was, and she ultimately said to me, education is the best thing that you can do for yourself. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was never another Sister Jenkins who wasn't able to read and write effectively enough to be in the world, I guess, owning her space the way she was owning it.
Here we go. I think it prompts you.
Yeah, it just says this meeting is being recorded. So I'm
on a recorded line for quality control purposes.
There we go. So,
all right. Well, Mary Asgill, thank you so much for joining us. Just to add context to the video, this video is being created for credential candidates at Stanislaus State, and they're about 2 months out from receiving their credential. And so we'd like to talk to teachers, outstanding teachers, about what it is that makes them successful in their practice, about what type of philosophies they have about education, and what strategies they bring to the classroom and beyond in your particular situation. So if you could start off by just telling us about what exactly you do at Turlock Unified, and then your teaching experience that led up to that.
Okay, so what I do, and hi everybody. What I do is help teachers embed writing strategies into their content. So whatever they've already created, or whether it's a district sponsored content, whatever it is, I help teachers figure out ways to embed writing strategies into those. And so that's truly a wonderful collaboration. I do a few other things on with regard to writing as well, but that's essentially what I do. And let's see, is the question what made me want to teach, or what led up to me having this particular focal point of my teaching?
Yeah, the latter, because I'll get to that first question in a minute. So your classroom experience and kind of where you've taught and what grades you've taught and what levels you've taught, just so the students have context.
So I've taught grades 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12. I've never taught 10th grade.
There you go. Skip the sophomores.
And I've always wanted to teach that, but never quite had the pleasure of that. But I did request them for advisement. So I had 10th graders for advisement, and so 11th and 12th. This is my 24th year, and prior to this, though, I wasn't a teacher, so this is a second career for me, and so I was a technical writer, and so that was what I think, that plus my love of reading and writing, is probably what led me to this position.
What stands out to you as kind of, is it fair to ask you a favorite grade level or a favorite kind of group?
Well, my favorites are secondary kids. so that 7 to 12 span, I mean, that's what I know. I didn't become an elementary school teacher on purpose. Yeah, so I think they work really, really hard, but I think you also have to have a special kind of way in with the little ones, just as you do for teenagers. So So I don't have, of that 7-12 span, no, I don't have a favorite. But I've been teaching seniors the longest, and 11th and 12th grade probably the longest.
Excellent. So what is it that got you into education? Did you have a teacher that was inspiring to you, or do you have educators in the family, or is there something that you can put your finger on that led you into, I know you didn't start in education, you started, I guess, in the private sector. I want to say you wrote computer manuals, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so you didn't start in education, but kind of what prompted the transition into education?
Well, a couple of things, and so when you talk about whether there was a particular teacher, whether it was all of those things that you just mentioned. My context starts with the church, so the first teachers I met were my Sunday school teachers. I mean, in terms of teaching on purpose, those Sunday school teachers, and then you have the teachers in school. Of course, I had really awesome teachers there. And then, but the family, I looked at how my grandmother taught me. She taught me words, when I was this little kid asking all these questions. And so if she's teaching me a word, cabinet or whatever it is, she would put these little index cards on it. And so I just learned, I just learned from everything and every person around me, really. So I think, when you couple all of that, plus I was in a career that I enjoyed, but there were segments of it, huge segments of it, that I really didn't like, and that was the content. So there was nothing thrilling or exciting about writing a manual. There was just nothing at all. And so when I figured out, oh, wow, I'm truly enjoying the stuff that I'm learning at university, Shakespeare and the rest of it, why don't I write about that stuff instead? And so I thought, well, what job could I do that would allow me to do something different every day? I still get to write. I still get to do all this great reading that I've been doing. I still get to interview people and talk to them. Teaching was just the natural for that. But I think the other side of it for me was a real social justice issue. And that was this notion of, I grew up in an area where there were lots of people who were functioning every single day, really smart, creative geniuses, really walking around, having several income streams, managing, being creative enough to, what they say, how did they say it? Rob Peter to pay Paul, stretching, so I'm watching all of this creativity around me. But then the bottom line is, through this woman in my church particularly, our pastor had given us these assignments where younger people had to work with a group of whichever group he assigned you. And so my particular grade level, I think we were 10th, 11th, 12th, we were the high school kids. We had to work with the elderly with anything they needed, cutting the lawn. I mean, I don't care what it was, whatever that was. And so the particular lady I had, Sister Jenkins, she had a lot of property, a lot of money, and I just watched this really smart lady with all these great things. In my mind, I thought, okay, I want to be her. She has lots of money. She owned lots of real estate. And she always carried cash. She always dealt with cash. She only needed me to be her secretary. So in 10th grade, I was essentially a secretary, just doing whatever she needed. Well, one day we're in the grocery store, and she takes out her check and she hands it to me. And so I was thinking that I was just writing out the check for, I thought it was just a regular transaction. For her, it was a necessity because she confided in me that she wasn't able to spell the number. So if it was $39.15, whatever it was. And so when we got to the car, I put her groceries in and all of that. And she just held my hand and she said, "Baby, don't be like me." And I'm thinking, but you're the one I want to be looked at, like, you have a new car, you have all this stuff. What she meant was, and she ultimately said to me, education is the best thing that you can do for yourself. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was never another Sister Jenkins who wasn't able to read and write effectively enough to be in the world, I guess, owning her space the way she was owning it. On the one hand, she had all of this stuff and she was owning it that way. But on the other hand, she had a desire to own it in those traditional ways where, you know, you read something, you understand it, you spell something, you can spell out $39.15. Those are the ways that she wanted to own her space, to own her world, and she couldn't. Sorry about that. Okay. So I think that was a huge genesis for wanting to make sure that my next steps after the second career would be teaching. That touched me in an immeasurable way.
Did you ever find out any more about her background, about why she was never able to develop those skills?
Yeah, I did. I did, but her background wasn't any different from any of the others. You know, you start early, you get a job, you know, finishing high school was important to my community at the time. You know, I'm 1,000 years old compared to you, so it was very different. It was very different. You know, it wasn't that, oh, finishing college or going to college. Those weren't even things that we thought about. You know, the big deal was graduate from high school. And so the generation before me, in fact, she was 2 generations before me, finishing high school wasn't the issue. Getting married, becoming a mom, getting a job, your husband has a job, you're raising kids, you know, you're paying your taxes, you're being a good citizen, but those are the things that there was no aspiration toward education, depending on the generation. And so for my generation, it was just finish high school. And then the generation after me, you know, of course, with my kids, it's go to college, that kind of thing.
I see. So if you had such kind of a strong mission getting into education, do you have any reflections or maybe tips for these upcoming soon-to-be teachers about dealing with apathy that students may have in the classroom, where you're coming to the job where you understand the value of education and you've seen people in your experiences that would be greatly benefited, in your opinion, by increasing their education, and then the students that you encounter in the classroom may not seem interested as much as you'd like them to be, if that question makes sense?
I need clarification. So are you asking how to deal with apathy in the classroom? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Well, I can tell you the way I dealt with it was just to make sure I knew my kids, because the beauty of teaching high school, the beauty of dealing with secondary kids, is that none of them will allow you to waste their time. So an adult will be polite and allow you to waste their time, and they'll smile and they'll tell you what you need to hear. A kid is going to act out, or they're going to physically, you know, they're going to yawn, they're going to do whatever it takes to show you that I do not care about what you're teaching me. So the way that I dealt with apathy was I got to know my kids. I got to know what was important to them. I got to know what mattered. And so if what I was teaching mattered to them in a way that was meaningful, and in a way that not was just meaningful, but in a way that was so relevant that they could use it tomorrow. And if I consistently taught that way, that's when they knew, okay, this woman's not going to waste our time. And so getting to know each kid happens every single day, all the time, for the 180 some days that we have to teach. And so, and asking them, just asking them, what are you into? And I don't mean those little surveys, but I'm talking about going really deep about what do you care about in the world? What matters to you? And then giving them all kinds of examples. And so for me, that meant always keeping the world in front of them. And so how can you be apathetic about COVID-19? And you know, how can you have apathy about that when you're looking at, you know, people dying, and you're looking at the seriousness of this? How's that even possible? Yeah, for some kids it might be, but then, you know, getting to know that kid might be, well, I don't care about this because I already have everything I need. Both my parents have jobs. I have a computer. I can do my homework, you know. So my biggest problem right now is, you know, winning on Fortnite or whatever.
Sure.
Or it could be apathy at the other extreme. Like, the problems I have in my life are so huge. This is just one of the many. So knowing the kids, really, really knowing them.
Excellent. So if they mentioned something that they were interested in, that you felt you could provide meaning in your instruction through understanding, would you go out and research those things, or would you just have
Always.
discussions always?
Always.
Can you
Always,
tell us
always.
maybe a few things that you researched that you wouldn't have otherwise?
How to fix stucco.
Okay.
Yeah, I had no desire to do that. It just never would have come up. Didn't want to know, and all of that. And so, you know, how to mix it, how to put the wire thingy there, and the amount of the cement that you put in, and how you can smooth it all out. Yeah, how to fix stucco. And so this idea then, if I'm teaching some concept about, you know, whatever it is, yes, I'm always making sure I'm tying that in with stucco. I'm tying it in with how to drive trucks, the 18-wheelers, how to take that test. So maybe the concept is close reading, and maybe we're reading something, a piece of literature, a poem. So I'm thinking about stucco and driving trucks in the back of my mind, because if I can analyze this poem, if I can break this thing down to its smallest components, down to a micro level, and fully understand that, I have to be able to do the same thing for stucco if I'm going to pass the test, so that I can get the job on the contract with the, you know, this builder that I'm working with. If I can understand this abstract thing, I can connect it to this concrete thing, so that it has meaning. It is now real to me. I understand why I need to really break down and analyze this poem. It makes sense to me now, because now it's about stucco.
And did you find yourself juggling stucco and truck driving and, you know, pool maintenance, and just, did you have 35 different interests in the room at once, and you were just no? Okay.
I just had one interest.
Stucco.
And a teenager's only interest is, what am I getting? Period. Right? So if I'm reading Billy Collins's poem about the lanyard, okay, and if I know that my stucco guy, my truck driver guy, or my kid who wants to go to UC Berkeley, my kid who wants to go to Princeton, if I know they're all in the same room, they only have one interest. And that is, for me, whatever I'm taking from that mini lesson, how does the bottom line of this connect with what I have to understand about what's in it for me? That's just one thing, and it's one thing all the time. Do I use multiple examples? Sure. I'll use stucco, I'll use Princeton, I'll use truck driving, I'll use whatever I need to use from the examples they've given me, but it's not about the particulars of those specific things. It's really only about, why do I need to learn this? What am I getting? And how's it connected to this poem?
You mentioned a little earlier about that elementary school kids have different, I forget the exact phrase that you used, but like, to get to them, to kind of work with them. Maybe you feel like you've already answered this, but what is it that you need to know or understand or be able to do to connect with the secondary demographic?
Well, they need a few things. So getting to know them and building that trust, of course, is the number one thing. But also, they need a lot of structure, and they need routines. I know that sounds boring and it sounds whatever, but Classrooms that are wishy-washy, kids don't really know where they're going or what they're supposed to be doing. They need the structure, many of them, just to kind of keep them on track, but also everybody needs a routine. You know, since we've been going through all of this, the first week I was just kind of in this weird fog, you know, and so I quickly found that, wait a second, I need to get back to waking up at the same time every day, getting out of my pajamas, getting, you know, sitting at my desk, but having the same work times, taking the same amount of breaks. That made me so much more productive. And so again, I told you, teenagers don't, a little kid will let you waste their time, but teenagers, they pretty much don't. The other thing is the work has to be challenging. It's got to be super hard. And I don't mean in some kind of artificial mechanical way. I mean that you're trying to teach this kid that his whole reason for being in your class is so he can graduate, so he can fix stucco. You've got to make sure that whatever that problem is, he's going to encounter something equally as hard or harder in his stucco world. And so those are the questions like, okay, what are you going to need to balance with this job? What else do you have to do? What is the hardest part of this job? What is the part of this job that you hate the most? You know, those are the kind, and so creativity, people think, you know, creativity is all about, you know, this thing that artists and writers and, you know, painters and musicians do. But we're looking at creativity all around us right now. At this very moment, we're having a Zoom session, right? Because creativity happens when the routine is broken. So if there's this structure, if there's this order, if there is this routine, creativity happens when you take a hacksaw to it and you say, okay, what you got now? Because this right here that made you so comfortable, it's now gone. So then you find creative ways to teach, which is what we're doing right now. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to keep these kids, if you know them well in a super friendly way, so that they trust you, be super consistent about the routines, and then make the work super hard. But here's the other part of that: super hard but super engaging. Make it, if it's not fun, then at least make it interesting, and at least make it touch them in some way. It's through those things that you break the routine. So if they know that my routine is, I'm going to start in the morning and I'm going to have my quote on the board and they need to respond to it, one of those days I'm going to walk in with the quote that they just never expected. You know, it might be something like, write for 30 seconds, imagining that you are somebody totally opposite from who you would be. And so I am not Benjamin Franklin, but for this prompt, I'm Benjamin Franklin. He is coming through me. And for that 30 seconds, I'm writing from his perspective. I'm thinking from his perspective. It's hard, but at least it's kind of interesting. It's kind of different, you see? Mm-hmm. So just when they have those routines and structures in place, creativity comes in when the routine is broken, just as what's happening with us now.
So I've heard from many students that you have kind of accomplished the holy grail of teaching, which is that students report that you've somehow taught them how to think. So I'm going to ask you a very difficult question and ask if you can break that down for us. If someone comes to you and says, I want to teach my students to think, how do I do that? What is your response?
Okay, well, when I teach students anything, I first of all teach them why they're doing it. Okay, so what I always want from them is them to say to me, why am I even doing this? And trust me, they have no problem asking. You know, and I always tell them, if I cannot answer you, then I'm doing something wrong. If I didn't have a purpose for this assignment, then, you know, I got to go back. And my purpose has to matter all the time. So the first line of critical thinking is this notion that I have to ask really great questions, and I have to teach my kids to ask really great questions, because thinking involves taking a deep dive, starting first and foremost with questions. And so how do I teach them to think? I walk through in purposeful ways. How in the world am I going to design questions, and only questions, about whatever it is? So they could very easily walk into the classroom, and for the first hour, or, you know, the first class period, so that's what, 51 minutes, all they're doing are asking questions. That's it. And they're asking questions on different levels. They're asking questions within questions. They are answering questions with questions, but it's only about questions, nothing else. And maybe at the end of the period, for 2 minutes, I just want to write about, well, what was your experience? And tell me about that. And then the next day, we're just talking about it. So this is a very slow process. Requiring thinking means that I cannot be on page 12 when the other teacher's on page 12. Thinking has to be explicit. It has to be direct. It has to be specific. So if I'm going to spend a week teaching them how to ask questions, and I'm just saying a week, I'm really spending the whole year, because I know when I do my syllabus, I do it for the whole year, so I know where they're going. And so the first order is to ask questions, okay? And then, so they know the types of questions, and they know when they can ask a question. Because the second thing I have to teach extraordinarily well with regard to thinking is how to listen. And so I teach them this process of the different types of listening that they do, and that we all do, and that we don't all do, meaning I could be talking to you right now, and you could be thinking about whatever is coming through that listening filter. You know, maybe your dog is giving you the stink eye because it's time for his walk, you know, and you're kind of preoccupied thinking about that. I mean, so teaching listening. So this process of teaching students how to think is very specific. It's very direct. It's explicit. It is peeling back one layer of the onion and saying, oh, let's take a look at this so you can see exactly what this looks like. What was that process of asking questions? How did that help you think? And then what are you asking questions about? And so I want them to pick up something, and I want them to look at that text, the discussion they're hearing on CNN, or whatever it is they're looking at, and then dive in with questions. And then we had senior seminar and junior seminar. We had it quite often, and we spent time exploring those questions. So the thinking, again, that's just the essential part of it. It is the absolutely mandated part of it, but it has to also work extraordinarily well with listening, and you have to teach those skills explicitly. And then, of course, we all teach students ways to respond, you know, so how would I respond if I completely disagree with every single thing I just heard on CNN, right? So maybe I can respond, well, there are multiple ways to respond, but essentially, I could respond in the affirmative. Yes, I agree with every single thing I just heard. Or I could respond in the negative. Nope, I agree with none of it. Or, of course, there's in between. And so teaching them to wear each set of those shoes and then to deconstruct what it felt like when you were disagreeing, if that wasn't your normal position, and what questions you needed to ask yourself to stay on track with it. And so was there clarity? So did you understand what was happening? Was the message clear? You had to ask, well, was it accurate? Was what I was just listening to, yeah, it was clear, I understood it, but was it accurate? Okay, yeah, I understood that it was clear, I understood that it was accurate, but was it even relevant? Was everything connected and relevant? Did the speaker stay on track? So did this argument or did whatever I was listening to have enough depth? Did it have enough breadth? Was it fair? Was it looking at issues from multiple perspectives? Was it looking through a lens of empathy? Or was it just strict information? So teaching them to think means, again, I'm asking questions, I'm listening well, and as Coleridge says, I'm suspending my disbelief. If I truly want to listen, there's no judgment here. All that's gone. I'm listening so I can be clear and so I can understand this process. And then I'm constantly referring to the details. Did the speaker give me any kinds of examples of what that looked like? Were there any dissenting views? What happened when another speaker said, I disagree with you? Those kinds of things. And so the thinking process, very clear, very explicit, happening every day, all the time, and then writing about the thinking in 2-3 minute bursts, that's it. And then trying that particular item of thinking again. So what I mean by that is, let's just say I've decided to focus on what type of thinking I need to do in order to listen effectively so that I would know whether or not what I'm listening to makes sense or not. Part of that listening might have to be making sure that I'm listening to summarize. So maybe I'm not listening to judge things or listening for anything else except what are the facts? What is the information? And can I repeat that to someone else? So their teachers are teaching thinking all the time in every single classroom. The only thing I do is have them analyze tiny snippets of thinking that happen throughout the 50-minute period.
So, to summarize, it kind of sounds like you try to give them verbiage and a framework for the things that they're already doing automatically. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and that all of their teachers are doing automatically.
I see.
Because they're summarizing in every single class. They're writing, they're reading, they're listening, they're speaking, they're doing all of these things in every single class. So every teacher is teaching them how to think. The only thing is I'm taking it in smaller snippets, I'm putting a label on it, and then I'm having them practice that particular type of thinking until they master it. And then we move on to the next type of thinking. So one type of thinking, again, might be with regard to listening, making sure I can summarize. And then we, moving on to the next thing. So the next thinking aspect.
You mentioned a seminar. What are some of your favorite strategies in the classroom? What are some of your go-to things that you really enjoyed having students work through? Like, for instance, were you big on cold calling? Were you big on think, pair, share? Just throwing out things randomly.
I don't know. I guess there were so many. I don't know that I have favorites, but I think probably my biggest strategy overall, bar none, is discussion. Teaching students how to talk well. And so looking at the difference between dialogue, discussion, conversations, debates, all those things are different. And so just letting kids know we're going to practice all of those. So in discussion, you can do so much with it. So with discussion, grouping them in a discussion format. You've been in my classroom before?
I haven't. No, I never got to visit your classroom.
Okay, so it was an L shape or a U shape, just this kind of U shape. And so setting up those discussion groups in small and large ways. So I had what were called, so there were 6 kids in a row. I'm sorry, there were 3 kids in a row. So 3, 6, 9, 12 on this side.
Mm-hmm.
And then facing the whiteboard, 3, 6, 9, 12. And then facing the other group of kids, 3, 6, 9, 12. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so
it does.
U shape. So within that U, there were pair groups that were just automatic because my students they all chose their own seats, and so they were already sitting next to their friends. So the pair groups, you have the 3 kids here, 3 kids here. So they would just turn and talk to each other, or they would turn behind them, talk to who was behind. So setting up the groups in a way that they had multiple pairings, but that they occurred in natural settings. So that would be a pair, and then a slightly larger group would be maybe just the row of 3, just those. And then a slightly larger group would be the 3, 6. So you have those 6 kids talking. Slightly larger group would be what I called the area group. So all 12 of them are now talking. Slightly larger group, of course, is 2 area groups, and one's taking notes about the discussion. And then the largest group, of course, is a whole class of, you've got those 36 seniors who are having a discussion. And all of the practice in thinking that we do leads up to that large seminar so that they understand how to support each other in such a large discussion setting, because they would have practiced the questions in smaller groups and practiced the routines and the protocols. So by the time we have our huge senior seminar, pretty much everyone participates. And like I said, if it's challenging for them and interesting enough, they will rise to that. So that's my primary strategy, talking and getting kids to talk about things that matter.
In that situation, would students be...
One other thing, and writing, because we never, ever, ever had discussion that didn't involve some kind of writing. So oftentimes, kids don't have their questions prepared, so they needed time to sit and prepare questions or kind of think through the reading in a certain way. So the writing was always connected to that.
In the setting with the seminar, would you assign positions to students to defend and make it kind of an academic activity, or would you just let students operate from kind of their own opinions or their own emotions?
I did both of those all the time. So even though these were student-run discussions, they would have already decided, as I'm calling them quad groups, even though there's 6 kids in the row, right? Mm-hmm. So each quad group leader would give me their discussion topic, so that I know what they wanted. So I guess in that regard, probably choice is another huge strategy. Okay. And so once I had their discussion topics, I would look at the ones that were repeating or the ones that really didn't seem very relevant. And then I would just star those and put it back out to the students and say, what do you guys think of these? Let's see, these are topics. And all the time they would come up with the useless topics or the all the time. So they knew um, these aren't going to be good fodder for a senior seminar. Not really. So yeah, some of the times I always had an overarching, very large, open-ended question, but their job was to winnow it down to questions that we could effectively have conversations about in 50 minutes.
Do you remember offhand any of the topics that went really well in class that a student brought to the discussion?
Yes, yes. I'm not sure which class this was, but you know ERWC.
Correct.
And you know some of the issues that we've had to deal with there. So this was during a good food, bad food unit. Do you remember that one? And
I do, yeah.
keep the journal of everything they ate and all of that. And so and then we had read some other authors that we were connecting to that. And so one of the topics was about food deserts. And this particular group, when they were researching the questions, and I think what was really wonderful was reading how they arrived at the question. They were at the time, and so again, I don't remember what year this was, but there were people who were saying there is no food in the food. I don't remember what was happening during that time. There was no food in the food, and why are there so many fast food places around? And so just from those general questions. Oh, and there was something about fast food was cheaper than cooking a chicken or something like that. And the kids started to realize, actually, no, it's not. And, you know, you could buy a chicken and you could eat off of that for a week, and you know, you can make soup with the bones and all of this. So I'm just remembering all of the ways that they're just only asking questions led them to this great topic. Here's the thing, and they had a topic about the academic stuff that was going on, but then we had this one situation where one of the food diaries was about, you know, well, I had Cheetos for breakfast and Dr. Pepper and, you know, and all of this. And so one boy, and this was the year I had a class of mostly boys. I probably only had, I don't know, maybe 10 girls in a class of 36 kids. And so one of them said, that's probably why you're so fat. And he was not, you know, I don't know, maybe he was having a bad day that day, or, you know, and this was typically a kid that I had to constantly kind of rein him in. So, you know, it wasn't that it was surprising that he said it. It was surprising that he would have said that in a whole class seminar. My temptation was to jump right in and save this young lady because she turned all shades of red. And she was not, this was a very strong young woman, strong personality. And so I think it just took her off guard. It took the whole class off guard. And so that whole take a deep breath, count to 10 thing was happening inside of me. So I just waited. I said absolutely nothing. I waited. And I was saying a little prayer in my head. But I had faith in my kids. And so I waited because we had talked about what happens when you see somebody getting so angry, you know, because, you know, ERWC, controversial issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
what happens when you see somebody getting so angry, they're ready to go off, and this one's cursing me out, and this one's, you know, what happens? And so we put in place, the kids decided this. Let's have a protocol where we just wait. We take a deep breath. You know, we're counting to 10, we're doing whatever, but we're not talking. We're going to sit and we're going to let the silence teach us what silence always teaches us, right? When you are still, silence says, you know, and I taught my kids about silence and the value of it. So the thing between a thought, you know, if I can tell my finger to do this, right? And it happens so fast, I don't think about it. That's my thought. The thing is, silence, you know, and we read all kinds of articles about it, but it's that gap between thinking and speaking. It's the silence that helps us figure out how to speak. But the thinking has to happen, and it requires silence for that. So we waited. And two boys spoke at the same time. And, you know, I told them it's like joining a freeway, so you gotta merge in slowly. Somebody's gotta pull back, somebody's gotta speed up. And so the kid who took the floor was not the one I expected. I expected her boyfriend to jump in, right? He said nothing. But this kid, soccer player, I love this kid. He said, well, what do you mean by fat? That was his question.
It's a good question.
That was his question. Because, you know, this other kid being smart alecky, again, he was, you know, that was his normal personality, but nobody expected that because he wasn't a mean kid. He wasn't normally a mean kid. And that little smirk he had on his face went away immediately. And so we waited. And in that silence, he said, well, okay, maybe that wasn't the right word. And we waited. And that became, well, maybe I meant that, you know, the junk food and eating the Cheetos and the Pepsi, the diet Dr. Pepper for breakfast is just because there's no food in it, and one kid goes, oh yeah, like that article. And so so that's when I step in and I say, you know, things like, okay, let them finish, and can you connect it to the article we read, those kinds of things. And so I'm constantly facilitating, constantly teaching, but from a huge distance, you know. So I start off with this much of me when they're learning, and it shrinks down to, it's a student-run discussion. I'm pretty much saying nothing. And so the joy was, this kid, not only did he come around to thinking through the impact of what he said on her, but connecting what he really meant to the text we were reading. And we kind of learned about the, you know, that ad hominem argument where you're attacking the person instead of really dealing with the issue. And so, and again, teaching them those things. Now, these are my seniors who are going to fix stucco. Okay. So he said, okay, well, I didn't mean to, you know, insult you and blah, blah, blah. And he said, but I did that, and I'm sorry. Turned the whole, I mean, that to me was one of the best senior seminars we ever had, because that could have gotten ugly really fast. But the thing I learned from it as a teacher was a couple of things, but this is the thing that I learned the most that really helped me figure out, okay, I need to add another layer to this teaching. And this was, a powerful young woman lost her voice that day. And the other 9 also lost theirs. The only people who stepped in to change the course of that conversation and in the process support this young lady were young men. And I thought, that is problematic in multiple ways. Yes, I'm glad that they did it, but I was not happy that my girls lost their voices, all of them. And so when we got to, I think this was the year when we were shortening the language, gender, culture unit. And then, or maybe this was the year that we voted on taking it out. And I think I was arguing that, no, we really do need to keep that in. And then, so the compromise was, okay, well, let's just do it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something.
Yeah, it was shortened.
Yeah, we shortened it a lot. And so within, but in that 3 weeks, it was powerful, because here's the thing. I only required them, because it was so short, and this was a requirement, and it was conscious and purposeful, to look at every single thing we read through the lens of women, everything. So I taught them the things they needed to understand explicitly, and they researched who is a woman, who is a girl, who is a lady, who is a female, and how do you know? How do you know that? You know? And so we're reading all of these authors that are challenging us, that are pushing us, that are sticking their fingers in our faces saying, no, blah, 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 blah. This is the space that we inhabited for 3 weeks, only through the lens of women, because I wanted to educate all of them about a particular aspect of their education that they may not have gotten. I wanted it interesting, I wanted it really hard, and I wanted it relevant. You know, Secretary Clinton had already told us about those 18 million cracks in that glass ceiling. They needed to understand exactly, explicitly what she meant, and what so many others, you know, Governor Newsom gave a shout out during his one of his updates for us to the mothers.
I heard that.
Yeah, and so, you know, balancing motherhood with, you know, trying to be a wife, and trying to do all of your duties as a teacher, and, you know, it's grading papers. You're trying to juggle a lot. And we had already studied, we studied women's brains, and because there was this article about why are there more male geniuses than female geniuses? Well, looking at the woman's brain, the way it's designed to be able to not multitask, but to be able to switch the brain from one thing to the next thing to the next thing in a split second, where all 7 of those plates that you're juggling are still up in the air. Men's brains are designed for intense and single-minded focus. So when you're looking at the number of PhDs you have on university campuses, if you're looking at the ability for you know, Einstein or whoever to unravel this thing in its small degree, well, you know what? Dude had a wife cooking dinner. He had somebody, you know, Mr. CEO has somebody walking that dog, making sure the kids aren't coming in disturbing stuff. You know, so we need to be okay with the roles that we choose. That's the thing. We have to be okay with the roles that we choose, unless they're ridiculously unfair. And so we had an opportunity to really, you know, argue about things that were effective, in the sense that they were addressing real world issues, and they were connected to everything that they were reading. So that little tiny language, gender, culture unit, the way that I decided to teach it stemmed from listening to my kids. That's where it came from. And so for me, knowing your kids, they won't be apathetic about things. They will be engaged if you know them, and if you know what's important to them, and if whatever problem they're trying to figure out is ridiculously hard, they have to be creative. Why? Because it broke the routine. I had to become a creative teacher in that moment that this kid decided to call this young woman fat. He broke the routine. My kids, yes, they had to rely on the structure, but they also pretty much had to recognize that oh, we need to solve this. You know, creativity forces that. It forces that.
Going a little further back, I know I'm guilty of it. Do you feel like the vast majority of teachers do not give their students enough wait time? And do you think teachers that you've observed are too quick to give away answers, or that they're impatient?
I don't know about the vast majority of teachers because I've never been in their classrooms. I just know for me, um, it took me so many years to learn. I mean, you read all the research on wait time. Yeah, that's great. But Jared, I had to sit on my hands multiple times. I had to get a tissue and just do this multiple times because, and it's still, even now, it's still ridiculously hard. So I have no answer to that question. I have not mastered it. I just, from day to day, I just do the best that I can.
Do you feel like there are any misconceptions about education that either society has about teachers and education, or that students that are about to graduate from the program and they're about to become gainfully employed teachers may have about their future profession? Because one thing I like to remind my students is that everyone in our society, for the most part, has kind of had a K-12 education. So they've in some ways grown up around teachers. So like, you had a kindergarten, a first, a second, a third, a fourth grade teacher, and you did not spend your formative years around a nurse or around a firefighter or around a policeman or around a contractor. And so it's the one profession that everybody has experience with. And so everyone kind of has opinions about education and kind of what it should be and maybe what it shouldn't be. And maybe some of those opinions are kind of rigid, perhaps. So it's kind of a double barrel question. You can go either way. Is there anything that society, this is a very broad sweeping statement, but so are there any things that society believes about education that you feel are wrong that you'd like to comment on? Or are there any things that you want to tell teachers that are about to graduate from this program? You may think this about education, but what you really need to know is.
Well, I think one misconception about the people in education, namely the students, namely the teenagers, that I hear all the time. I hear it when I'm in the line in the supermarket. I could be at the post office. If I'm in a line or if I'm just talking to my friends or just I'm in church, a huge sweeping misconception is that teenagers they're snarky and they're rude and they're petty and they just care about their looks and that's a huge misconception. It's huge. Kids they are the most honest people on the planet. You know, they're smart, they're funny, they're creative, they're kind, but they're honest. And I don't mean that in the sense that, oh, kids don't lie. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that you spend time getting to know a kid, you're going to know exactly what he's feeling, what he's thinking. They're not good at putting on that plastic face and being inauthentic. Mm-hmm. They're going to change their hair purple. They're going to put I don't know, a big massive tattoo somewhere on their face. They're going to wear a cap that's going to say, "You better see me." And so what I love about them, these kids that we think are so busy and, they're acting out and they're doing all of that. No, that kid is saying, "You see me. I'm going to make you see me. And you need to figure out what's going to keep me in my seat, what's going to keep me from making snarky, rude, mean comments. That's your job." My job as a teenager is to be super honest about who I am. Even that kid that you didn't even know had suicidal tendencies or whatever is gonna, on some of those days, in some of those lessons, Jared, in some of those writing assignments, if we look for the patterns, it's gonna be there. None of us as teachers are ever surprised about the kid who became, you know, the CEO, or the kid who is out there feeding the homeless and finding ways to support the community. This one became president of the bank, or this one is an entertainer. We're not, we think, yeah, that, you had that. But we also taught the serial killers. We taught those kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we, and again, I know I've said this before, but we got to know the kids. We have to really, really know them. And so when you look at the kid at the one extreme who's acting out and being a super thorn in your side, that kid is just saying, see me and figure out what I'm about. And I'm going to tell you every day through my acting out until you get it. Then you have the kid at the other extreme who has the A, but is not satisfied until that A+ shows up.
Absolutely.
And that's that kid at that other extreme who is also saying, you will see me, and I'm going to honestly tell you who I am, right? I knew when that kid was stressing out and being too hard on himself or herself, I knew, right? Because I know I'm talking to this kid every day. I'm finding ways to make those touches, those ways that I can touch this kid every single day, right? Nice shoes you're wearing, or, you know, whatever it is. Then you have that, those two groups of kids in the middle, the one that is saying, don't see me, I'm just like everybody else, there's really nothing to see, why are you even looking at me, I'm just like everybody else. Then you have that kid who says, please don't see me. Let me fade into the woodwork. Let me just, so the biggest misconception that I think that happens in education is with the characters who are in the story, namely the kids, right? And that these teenagers are these awful, terrible, very bad people. And I hear it all the time.
I do too. I do.
You know?
I do as well, yeah.
But you and I know how awesome they are.
We do, and hopefully the people that are graduating from the program will get to experience that. It's funny, I've done a few other interviews, and I think everyone else that I've talked to has mentioned that in some capacity, that teenagers are misunderstood and that they're these brilliant, interesting, compassionate people, but they always get this terrible kind of representation from society at large, which is, I don't know why that is. I guess people just, it's easy to compartmentalize them in that way and just kind of put them in a box, I suppose.
How old are your kids?
That I teach, or my personal kids?
Your personal children.
Phoebe is 3 and Benjamin is going to be 4 months in just a few days.
Oh, child. I have 28, 26, and 21. They have been teenagers. And the reason people have those feelings about teenagers is because that's how they are at home with us.
Yeah.
They can be snarky and awful and, you know, how was your day? Fine. Mm-hmm. You know, what did you do today? Nothing. You know, I mean, and so they're just thinking, okay, well, if my teenagers are that way, all of them must be, you know, so that's the perception. But when they get to school with us, with teachers, they are still authentically who they are. I think, you know, the lady in the supermarket or in the post office, they think teenagers are horrible because that's what they deal with at home. Mm-hmm. But when that kid is at home, not among their, you know, their people, their friends, their, you know, and it's just them and the parents, kids are still honest in the way that they're reading all those situations, you know? They're still honest people. And so maybe they're behaving the way, whatever, because maybe the structures aren't in place. Maybe you've allowed me to come home and tell you, fine. Maybe I didn't force you to actually talk to me. How was your day is very different from what was the best part of your day. So and I think that bleeds over into in terms of the people within education. I think the other misunderstood group will be the teachers. Um, and we have different misunderstood groups. You've got teachers, you've got admin, and admin, we can put them in these stereotypes. Oh, they're all this way. Teachers are all this way. Coaches are all this way. Counselors are all this way. No. But what happens is, with regard to teachers, the thing I hear the most is, oh, well, they get the whole summer off, and they get paid for the whole summer. They don't. I think people don't really understand how hard we work even during the summers, and how hard we're working all the time, because we do brain work. So when we're watching the news, oh, I can turn that into a lesson.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a new label on the water bottle. Oh, my kids can analyze that. Whatever it is, we're constantly thinking and taking notes. And, I'm typing stuff into my phone of lessons I want to do. So the thinking never stops. And that's hard. You need to, and this has been a huge challenge for me, when to turn off that brain. Because if you're constantly thinking, you go back to school just as burned out as you were when you left. And we all burn out on certain days. Some of us have days of the week that we burn out. Some of us have certain periods that we burn out, and then the next period comes in and you're refreshed. And it's like, yay, has arrived. I love you people. Thank you for coming, and so we burn out in little tiny micro degrees. But I think that it's what we do every day, and how many hats we wear, is extraordinary. And I don't think the public really gets that sometimes we're filling up our classroom refrigerators so we know XYZ kid hasn't eaten, and they really can't wait till nutrition break or whatever it is, and they're coming in at 7:30 in the morning to say hi to you, and oh yeah, Asgill, by the way, what you got in that fridge, and so I think we wear so many hats that we weren't trained to wear. Counselor, psychologist, nurse, mother, father, coach, mentor, friend, disciplinarian. I mean, there's so many hats. So I think the public thinks that all we do is we go in and we teach a content. We don't. We don't. We teach a whole child, mind, body, and spirit. We teach that whole kid, and we have to constantly learn how to do that, which is a lot of research about the brain, about teenagers, about, whatever it is. And so we're in an environment where, because we wear so many hats, we're changing all the time. And it's super important, I think. I think teachers don't, we don't market who we are very well, because people think this job is like, oh, okay, well, I've been in school for 12 years, or I've been in school for 16 years, and I know what teachers do. I've watched them for 16 years. I know what they do. No, not really. That's like saying, oh, well, I've watched brain surgery for 16 years. I'm pretty sure I could do that. So I think those two main misconceptions, I think, are the general ones, the huge ones.
Well, I heard that you really appreciate what sounds like the challenge of teaching. And then I'm hearing that you appreciate your ability to kind of look around you in your day-to-day life and kind of mine for things that you could bring back into the classroom to teach. But what would you say is your favorite part about teaching and being in education?
My favorite part about teaching and my favorite part about being in education?
Well, I tried to conflate the two because I know that you're no longer in the classroom. So if you just want to remember what it was like to be in the classroom and you want to tell us about that experience, that's great. Or if you'd like to make a broader statement about just working in the field of education, I kind of figured you could take it in either direction.
Well, I think probably now that you've elaborated a little bit more, it's probably just one thing. one of many things, but this one is huge for me. And it's always making sure that I'm matching the content of whatever I'm doing with whatever the person or the student or the teacher, whatever that person needs or wants. But that I'm doing it from a place of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So if what I'm teaching my students means that there needs to be a mind shift, I'm going to explain to them, here's my perspective about argument, whatever it is, you know. And my perspective is that argument, all arguments, every single one of them needs to start from a place of empathy, which means I don't get to have a judgment. I get to fully and completely listen to everything you're saying. I get to feel that thing. I get to own that thing the way you own it. That takes a whole mindset shift to be able to do that. So if I'm working with students or whoever I'm working with or whoever I'm talking to, if I'm coming from a place of authenticity, this thing is real for me, this thing that I'm showing you is connected to my values. Yes, you said to me you want this particular thing. So my stucco kid has said, I only care about stucco.
Sure.
But from a place, I wouldn't be authentically myself if I set aside those values that said, I'm going to help you learn how to think argumentatively about stucco. Which means this, I would not be true to myself if I'm just faking and it's gonna be hard. I would not be true to my weird, quirky personality if I didn't say, but it's gonna be fun. Or at the very least, it's gonna be interesting because I'm gonna break your routine and add some creativity in it. So it's always this kind of situation where you're trying to match who you really are as a teacher. Because if you try to fake that and teach the way someone else is doing it, it's never going to work. The kids are going to see right through you. You're going to lose them and you'll be bored, you know? So figure out what your values are, your beliefs are, your identity is, your authentic self is, and be that person always, always. So when I'm having an argument, and if it's not natural for me to come from the place of empathy first, where I'm truly trying to understand you, then it's gonna, that's how you know whether or not what you're doing is going to work or whether or not you have to learn something new. Because if you're coming from a place where, okay, well, we're going to argue, but I'm never going to listen to you. And if I do listen, I'm only going to remain silent so that I can counteract whatever it is you're saying. If that's authentically who I am as a person, and I've listened to my kids say, here's who we are, we need to make you see us, something's not going to work in education if something doesn't change. So either I'm going to bend these kids to my will and force them to hear my argument, my rhetoric on whatever it is, or as a teacher, I'm going to understand that, wow, this is going to require some flexibility. I'm going to have to understand that when the wind is blowing, the reed will lay down. It's still a reed, but it's bending because that's where the real strength is. So when I first came to Turlock, the first thing I had to do was know my kids. They had never, ever had an African-American teacher, ever, in 12 years, okay? And I saw this year after year, and I've been in the district now. This is the end of my 14th year. And so I was always the first person that they had ever, it's like, okay, I'm going to be with this woman for 180 something days, So authentically, I wanted them to know, yes, you got a Black woman standing before you here. Here's who I am. These are my values. Yeah. But I put those aside because it wasn't about me. In front of that classroom, it's like, no, I got 150 different personalities that I have to learn and I have to know. So laying down like the reed or bending didn't mean that I was no longer this authentic person who really wanted to have some real conversations about things with regard to women, with regard to being Black. I mean, all of those kinds of things. Yes, I totally was gonna have those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew I want to teach you this particular thing. And I can't do that if I don't know you. I can't do that if I don't see you. So I figured out who was in my class, a lot of Portuguese American boys in this particular class that we just talked about. But at the beginning of that, I had to always make sure my kids knew their own language, their own culture, their own environment, their own world that they researched, right? So you have a Portuguese American Pulitzer Prize winning author in Los Baños that they didn't even know about, right? And so I'm finding ways, Chris Tovani had this really great book, Read and Don't Fix No Chevys, right? Those were my kids. So I'm bringing in, what does reading have to do with fixing a Chevy? We're reading and we're talking about those things. And why is it important for you to know who Alfred Lewis is? Why is it important for you to read 60 Acres in a Barn, which is in part about this Central Valley? Why is this important? I'm letting them know this is part of your identity, and you have multiple identities, but this is just part of them. And I want to bring those into the classroom so you can know yourselves, so I can know you, so we can know each other. And I'm constantly doing that with culture, with gender, with language, constantly bringing in those histories. And so I guess the THS history department, I just, they were my saviors because I was not going to do all of that research. I would pick up the phone and I would call Indo, I would call Kitamura, and I would say, okay, what's the history of, this blah, blah, blah in the Valley, help me out, Sean Gilbert. I mean, and so they knew, I bugged them to death. Like, okay, I got it, and then I did a little bit of research and here brought this in. And then I'm saying, talk to Mr. Gilbert about it, talk to Kitamura about it, talk to Mr. Mendonça about it, right? Because this is where I'm getting this information. And so I'm pulling this stuff, from where we are, because it's real, it's relevant. So, the multifaceted thing, this very hard thing that we do every day, people just don't know. We need to market better.
I agree with that. 100%. Well, I have one last question for you. Speaking of books and research, are there any books that you've read, movies that you've seen, or albums that you have listened to recently, or just your go-to faves that you'd like to recommend to our viewership?
Well, I was just listening to NPR this morning, and the sad news that Ellis Marsalis died. And this very famous jazz musician with these super famous kids. I mean, people would have heard of Wynton Marsalis or Branford Marsalis, right? And so for me, the music, so I didn't know Ellis's music. I knew Branford, I knew Wynton. I didn't know the dad. And I'm from New Orleans. They're all from New Orleans, and I knew, you know, uh, Blanchard, and I knew, you know, Donald Harrison, and I knew Harry Connick Jr. And I had their music on my iPhone, right? I had their music, but I never had his music. And so today, when I heard um, this song, I think it was called "When We Met." And I thought, well, let me check that out. And so I just started exploring, and oh my gosh, that was going through me. So today, Ellis Marsalis and the music. I am reading or rereading I think that it's called The 5 Elements of Effective Thinking.
Okay.
And it was written by a math teacher. So I've read that book the first time, and I read it again to just get different ideas. But now that I have so much silence in my life, that I can select, I can choose where the silent moments are. I'm reading that alongside a series of children's books. So the TUSD Equity Task Force has given to all elementary school teachers several books. One of them is called Malala's Magic Pen, which I was working on before you called. So this one.
Okay, excellent.
And so I actually have all the other ones too. They're in my office back there, but one of them is called Ouch Moments. Another one's called Don't Touch My Hair. And then I'm blanking on the last one. Oh, it's called Teach Me Your Name. And so the Equity Task Force, the goal of equity, diversity, and inclusion is always a part of every single thing that I teach. So I'm looking at the 5 elements of effective thinking, and I'm thinking how, and it's divided into, you know, earth and air. And one of my favorite cartoon series is the Avatar series. Do you know?
I mean, I'm familiar with the film. I didn't know it was a cartoon.
Yeah, there's a cartoon series called The Last
Airbender. Okay.
Yeah,
I have heard of that.
Airbender. And so there are firebenders and airbenders and waterbenders. So you're familiar with that?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So this book that I'm reading is about these elements. So for example, the first element is earth, and it's this idea of being thoroughly grounded, completely, deeply rooted in the basics. So the first series that I'm doing, for example, with the work that I'm working on with my PLCs and the series of videos I'm going to be making have to do with how do you write an effective sentence? What lives inside of a sentence? And what is the content and the structure of these sentences, right? So I'm practicing that first element of earth. In terms of writing, the most basic piece of it is that one single sentence. So I'm reading and thinking about earth, and I'm thinking and reading about this cartoon series, The Last Airbender, and looking at the earthbenders who moved the rocks, and they moved the dust, and they could do so much with those. And I hope your students do check out these cartoons. But that matched with the children's books. So what is the most basic way that I can take these new things that I'm learning and match that with the old things? The new things is the children's books, and it's creative, and it's going to take the kids out of their routine because they want Julius Caesar and they want Othello and they want what they know because it's 12th grade English.
Sure.
And I'm bringing in Malala. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always forcing the creativity on them. Take the routine, break it, and give me this weird thing that I didn't expect. And now suddenly I have to take that weird thing and I have to connect it to this other weird thing. I'm 17. I don't want to watch a cartoon. Why are you even teaching this to me? Right? and then pair that with this other thing, these professors that have written this really weighty information on thinking well, but through the metaphor of earth and fire and air and water. Do you see?
Uh-huh.
So those are the new things that I'm reading, or the new kinds of ways I'm connecting things to what I'm reading. So new, the children's books. The old, I've read these two professors before, and the sheer love of the cartoons. So
Excellent.
that's what's happening right now, and the Ellis Marsalis music. That was new for me. So I would highly recommend those.
All right, fantastic, Mary. Well, thank you so much for your time. Just so much fantastic stuff that the students can reflect on, and just, I don't know, just a master class on how you can be a fantastic teacher. So I just so much appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.